what do you learn here? I am a soul, right? You know, I have a family member who is always dragged down, and I'm going to use the word depressed by the world, especially since the election. We'll leave it at that. We don't talk politics here. But it's very sad that he's not balanced. He doesn't have a place to go. He does not believe as we do if you're here, you know. And it's really hard to be around him. It's not just that he has political discussions, but he carries this weight in his chest. And I found myself right after the election thinking to myself, I didn't say it out loud, give your soul a break. Give your little soul a break. You know, how many of you are here for the first time? Nobody. Of course not, right? They're home. They're on Zoom. But it's a little tiny, warm place that is truthful. But in these times, it's suffering. And he's boom, boom, boom. You know, he's really so upset. And I just thought to myself, give your soul a break. Do you give your soul a break? You do? What does that mean to you? You want to share, or we'll wait for Tony to get up here? And, you know, Tony's our guest speaker tonight. Brother Tony will, in great depth, talk about things that I'm just introducing. And we spoke the other day, and he will really break it all down for you. But did you want to comment?
Just, I think whatever God wills, we have to accept. Whatever God wills, we have to accept. And I'm grateful that uh, I'm at a place where I am. And I come here and I love it. And I meet people like who think it's so nice to be spiritual and broad minded and open minded. I think we are very blessed.
I feel blessed too, and I feel rich. This is what we think of as wealth. You know, doesn't matter how much money you have in your pocket, but what we have here is shared, and it's beautiful, and it's worldwide, by the way. You know, yeah, not too many millions, but we are worldwide sharing, and we go to that place that gives our soul a break, because the world, you know, we talk about body consciousness and soul consciousness, and the body consciousness is something that's hard sometimes to shake, the material things in the world, the tragedies, the news headlines. So come here. And if you can't come here in your body, although you're here today, and you're here too, Zoomers, I'm just joking with you. But if you can't, you can always come in your mind. And we do that. We do exercises and actually leaving. You know, we don't look it. We can be walking on the street and we don't look like we're leaving our mind, but we're somewhere else. There's a nice expression, see but don't see, hear but don't hear. So before I let Brother Tony take over, I want to read you the beautiful blurb that you wrote this, right, Tony? Yeah. Man of many hats. Renaissance man, Tony. How can we please the soul? And we're going to go to a metaphor of the river. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, spiritual river. We have to sail on that river and grace it with our love, our understanding, and our acceptance. Only when we reach that point in the river of our spirituality can we please the soul. So we are the soul, but sometimes we don't treat ourselves as well as we should. Brother Tony, come help us stay in that place you're talking about, okay? And thank you for joining us this evening. Om Shanti. And I'd like to introduce a special guest tonight who's here for the first time, right? No, Thursday nights? She's been in Harmony House, but this is Tony's daughter. May I? I've done it. Sarah. Shanti. Thank you, Tom.
I have to repeat um, Louise's surprise. I brought my daughter because I figured I'd only have one person looking at me because the land is very cold. So I had to bring my own audience. So I'm glad you all showed up. When this subject came up, I said, how can you give something to something that has everything, you know? Like, what do you give to someone that has everything? I used to joke about my dad, who was very cranky, and I said, what do you get for someone who hates everything? So I had to think about it a little bit because it's like we're talking about the soul like it's separate from us. And in fact, it is. And the topic made me think about exactly what are we talking about in terms of pleasing the soul, in terms of giving gifts for the soul. To me, is what do we give the soul from ourselves based on what we get? So I was thinking, basically, we live in our senses. We react um, to the world around us sensorially. You know, we get angry. I have I call them the terrible A's: anxiety, arrogance, and anger. There are three things that really create a huge deal of unhappiness in our lives. And these are qualities that we have around us. And then to put a kind of a personal on it, I used to think that stress was actually something good. Those of you who've been here before have heard this story about how I thought stress was actually something positive. But the fact is that anger, anxiety, and arrogance are lurking right behind the stress. They're sitting there waiting for an opportunity to come out and just kind of assert themselves. So that stress that you think is useful to make things happen and make people do things and make yourself do things is carrying this weight of all these terrible, heavy things that make you unhappy. In the best of times, you become indifferent. That's what passes for wisdom in some places. Then don't care. So, but that's essentially the repertory of our life experiences for a lot of us until we try to find something that transcends that. Until we basically say, okay, how do we mitigate this this condition that we're facing, all these frustrations and angers and all these issues that kind of assault us, sometimes with our own help, sometimes without our help. And for those of you, all of you that come here, obviously, you've look, what do we do to transcend that? You're looking at, and you're saying, well, it's the soul, the spirit that begins to give us some relief from these kinds of things that we all live with. I mean, they don't go away. They hang around for a long time. There are a few people that here in the BKs that actually have managed to put them all aside. I may have met one or two of them, but not too many of them. We all have this, carry this around with us. But it's a soul that our soul, there's our focus on the soul that makes it possible for us to begin to kind of transcend all of these different kinds of stresses that we are put on us and that we put on ourselves. So, and the soul is what gives us the ability to make judgments, to perform in our life in a positive way. And most importantly, and I'll come to this subject again a couple of times in this discussion, is gives us the ability to love. Very important part of our existence. And we'll come back to that a little bit later on. So, what do we do in return for a something that actually gives us life, because the soul is what animates us. Actually, the word animate is a Latin for soul, anima, soul. So what do we do for something that animates us, that gives our existence its quality, its consciousness? It's human consciousness comes from that meshing of the soul and the body. So what do we do for this quality that brings us to life, that makes it possible for us to experience the world in a way that's not oppressive, in a way that begins to um, bring the qualities of this world that are positive into our life? So what do we do? What's the first step that we do? What's the gift that we give for getting this gift? And here, as you all probably are aware, the first gift, as far as I'm concerned, is recognizing the soul. That's how you start. You say, okay, I am a soul. I'm not a body. I'm not, I'm not an architect. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a pharmacist. I'm not a whatever politician. I am a soul. So that is basically the first quality that comes out of this process. What are we about? So when you start saying, I'm a soul, I'm recognizing the soul, you're doing something very special, because we're all embodied souls, obviously, but you're at least recognizing there's something transcendent going on. And that is a gift. Just like the soul gives us the gift of animating us, bringing us into some sort of consciousness and existence, when we recognize the soul, when we say, okay, we understand that we are spiritual, the soul rejoices. Soul finds it rewarding. It doesn't, and the soul does not take it for granted. Very important that you recognize it, that you're conscious of it. So that is basically the beginning of the process of the gift or gifts you give the soul. And so that starts the process. So what is the next step, the next gift we give? And this is one that we've talked about before, but I think in this context is very appropriate, is that we live in the present. We live in the moment. In order for us, once we recognize the soul, to actually begin to engage with it, we have to engage with it now, in this moment. Can't engage with it yesterday. You're not going to engage with it in the future, because you don't know what's happening in the future, especially in these days. We're not sure we're getting to tomorrow, let alone, a few weeks from now. So you engage with it now. The analogy that's the most appropriate is how we love. Okay. In poetry, we say, we will love through eternity or the end of time, whichever comes first. Okay. Not through tomorrow. Not that I loved yesterday, but you love now. Because love is something that's only in the present. Only now do you experience love. You don't experience love in the future. You don't experience it in the past. In any context where you're thinking about the past, it's a memory of something, maybe something beautiful, something precious, but it's not now. Same thing with the soul. It's now. You can't think of the soul in the past, and you certainly can't think of it in the future. You have to think about it now, in this moment. Another analogy is friendship. Okay. Implicit in friendship is that you are in the moment. If there's some sort of nostalgic motivation you have, it's basically a memory. Again, it could be a nice memory, but it's not friendship. It's something that you experience in the moment. Friendship is like love. And again, going back to the whole gift, is what we do in terms of being spiritually conscious. You have to do it now. You have to experience it now. This is the moment that it really counts. So it's very important that we keep that in mind, because the experiencing of the soul in the now is a bodily experience. Okay, so here we get to the real material connection between material and spiritual. To experience spirituality in the now, you're experiencing in the body. Your body is recognizing this engagement, this combination you have with the soul. It's very important because we all live in bodies. We don't, soul outside of the body is a different thing. It doesn't have anything to do with how we live. So it's very important because this is something this is not just recognizing spirituality, it's now beginning to experience it directly. And you experience it with your senses, with your body, with all of these things are part of your experience. And you bring the soul into that experience. You bring your spirituality in that experience. So you experience it in the now. So that's a very important gift you give to the soul. You bring it into your life. You bring it into your existence. You bring it into where you are. So, and that, again, I believe is a gift. Just like the soul gives us all the kinds of beautiful qualities that helps us kind of transcend the world and take us into different places, we take the body with us into our existence. Yeah, I mean, we take the soul with us into our bodies, into our existence. And I think it's a very important gift because the soul is looking to be part of your life. The soul is looking to be integral, looking for you to be an integral person. So that's the second gift. It's only in this moment that we can invoke these deep spiritual sensibilities that we're developing. They're not something that you can experience in any other context. It's only in the moment. It's not in the past, and it's not in the future. Even though sometimes we think that way, that's not really the way it works. And the reason we come to places like this is because we're looking to find how we can experience it now, not to take it home with you tomorrow and think about it and write something and do it in the future. You want to experience it now. You want to understand it now. So, and I have a kind of a little philosophical insight or perception of this is that what we live now, the moment that we're living now, is actually the only contact that we have with eternity. The moment you're living now is the continuum of eternity that you're experiencing now. Because the past is gone. You've experienced already. It's gone. It's whatever it is. It's not an experience you have right now, and the future doesn't exist. So when you're talking about eternity, we talk later about loving someone through eternity. You love them now and forever now. And the same thing in the way we experience the moment. It's part of the eternal continuum of our existence. You only experience eternity in the moment. It's never a memory. It's never a projection. This is what we feel now. This is where we feel love. This is where we feel friendship. These are the qualities that we derive from the spiritual consciousness and engagement in the moment. Then there is a third gift that I thought about that I think is also kind of relevant to this process of spirituality. And this is when my reference to there is a river who seems make glad the city of God is actually from the Psalms in the Old Testament. And it's an analogy that is in almost every single spiritual and religious scripture. River and spirituality is very closely tied. It's one of those things that seems to be repeating itself in all kinds of religious contexts and spiritual contexts. So we ask the soul, where do you come from? We interrogate ourselves in that. Where does the soul come from? And that's where the analogy of the river, to me, is relevant, because the river empties into the ocean and is fed by rain that comes from the ocean. It's a kind of a continuous cycle. And where you're in the river, that water, you have connecting with everything, the entire cycle, the rain, the river, the ocean. So the river, to me, is a kind of analogy for your spiritual journey, your spiritual movement. One of the critical things of the river is that it has to keep moving. It can never stop. When the river stops, it becomes a lake. And then if the lake has no outlet or anything to feed it, it becomes stagnant. And doesn't really do any, at some point it can't even sustain life anymore. So spirituality for me is very analogous to the river. It continues flowing. Now, we do a lot of things to the rivers. We dam them, we change the course of the river, but the reality is the river always keeps moving. When I was working a while back, I was doing a project in New Rochelle, and we were building new entrances to a bunch of housing projects. And we found out there was a river running through that part of New Rochelle. Underground river. And that's actually quite common. Underground river is actually very common. So we're trying to figure out how we have to put these entrances in the foundations that are fairly deep. And the engineer I was working with said, well, you can't stop the water. So we had to go and figure out the direction of the river. And we had to make holes in the foundations to let the river through. Because if we stopped the river, that water was going to mess up the entire development. It was an underground river. It was really incredible experience. We had designed the foundations. We had to put holes in them. We had to figure out where the river was and let that river continue to flow and make sure that we don't have a situation where it diverted in any way and ended up creating flooding in any of the buildings. So spirituality needs to be like that. Cannot be stopped. It goes this way. There's a barrier. You go this way. You go around. Go over. You go under. You do something. But you don't stay there. You don't stagnate. So that analogy to me, now I'm remembering the experience with it. And I've read about this. I think I've worked on other projects where this is an issue, where we basically relocated the building to make sure that we didn't touch the river. And they're actually fairly well known to geologists. It's not something to the people that do the geotechnical analysis when you're doing a foundation. When you have moving water, you stop and you start looking at how you're going to deal with it. Moving water is a very bad thing to be doing anything to stop it. So that is the critical part of spirituality, that it cannot be stopped. Once you're in the river, you're moving through the river, you're going through it, you're basically looking to where the soul comes from. And the soul is very happy to show you where it comes from. It's thrilled that you're following it. It's taking you to where it comes from, taking you back to the ocean, taking you to where the creation of water and rains. I mean, this is something that's very important. And this is a gift that you give, and that's greatly appreciated. And the most important thing about this is that, again, we're talking about being in a body. So as a spiritual process, you're in a body, and a river gets nourished by the banks. Just like it nourishes the banks, fertilizes, provides life to the area around the banks also nourish the river. Just like the world, the material world can nourish us if we let it. We don't create unreasonable expectations, or we look at things in a way that doesn't really take into account that we have to keep moving, and we have to take what we get and appreciate it, and not try to make it into something that it's not. So this is the gift we give that keeps giving to us, because the moment we give these kinds of gifts, the moment we make this recognition and begin to feel this sense of fluidity, continuity in our lives, we immediately get benefits. Immediately. Not just spiritual benefits, we get material benefits. You get a material benefit. Things happen to you that are good, that make you feel good, that help you. Things that may have been there before, but you didn't notice them. But because now you're fluid, you're permitting this process to take place, to permit it to go in the direction it needs to go, then there's a benefit that was there, may have been already been there, but now you're appreciating it. Now you're enjoying it. And the most important thing is that the soul is not greedy. You give it only one gift, it's happy. You give it two, it's happier. You give it three, but whatever comes, whatever you do to kind of enrich your spiritual experience is going to be something that's going to be appreciated. And it's going to make the process of being an embodied soul a lot more, how would I say it? A lot more satisfying, because you're not fighting anything. You're not fighting against the current. So there's all kinds of fruits that come out of this process, like the river bears fruit on the shore. And ultimately, this process, if we begin to kind of look at our spiritual engagement in this way, you begin to see how all of these things tie into us, how all these rivulets and streams and all of these other aspects of your life that you're trying to define begin to come together and give you some sense of where you stand in the process. They give your life, they give the process of your life speed. They speed it up, they slow it down, enriches it. And the whole point of this process is to relieve ourselves of all of this weights that we carry, all of these qualities that bring us stress. And the gift that we give is by giving them up, or giving them at least a moment of pause so that we can begin to experience what it is that it is to be an embodied soul. Not someone that's just interested or focused on sensory world, which is where we all kind of grow up in, sensory world. And those of us that have religious background, that sensory world is brought into the religious experience too. It's rituals and routines. But for us, the important thing is to be able to be free of all of that and just engage ourselves personally in this process. So those are the gifts that I began to kind of define as gifts for the soul. And I am interested, since I've been talking all this time without stopping, in getting kind of some response on what your perception is of these three different kinds of experiences that we're talking about. Recognizing ourselves as spirits, as souls, living in the moment, and understanding that our life is a continuum for which we have to be constantly present in. Mic is on? No, it's not. Must have been something I said. Was asking what?
Who is saying that the soul is happy to show you where it comes from? Who's the you? You get it?
That was the point I was making right after the first point, is that we're an embodied soul, but only if we live in the present. In the present, we can ask and answer those questions. Doing it in context that has to do with history or projections doesn't work. The person or the entity asking that is the embodied soul, and only in the present.
So who's deciding to treat the soul well? This is very, do you get it? Can anyone explain it in lay terms? Anybody? Try, Anne? Anybody?
How do you give a gift to someone that has everything, right?
Well, who's giving the gift?
But the assumption is that
Well, yeah.
The soul has everything. It doesn't. It needs you. It needs your engagement. It needs your presence. The
But
soul doesn't have everything unless you're engaged with it, unless it's part of your consciousness. That's the point I was trying to make in this, is that the gift is that you bring the soul into the present quality of your existence, of your consciousness. Otherwise, it's struggling between your material values and your spiritual values. They tend to kind of get separate.
right.
And you have an issue being pulled in one side and the other. And this is not like, this is everybody's situation. Material versus spiritual is the way we live. We leave this place and there's a whole bunch of things that we have to deal with. But what is it that we do to make things right for us? And the soul is happy when we do this. And it reflects that happiness in ourselves,
So
as opposed to when we're doing things like working and doing a project and doing whatever thing I'm doing and getting things organized and getting people to do their tasks. That doesn't make me happy. That's a job. That's what I do. That's the material world. It's only when I can bring that into context of my own spiritual consciousness that I begin to think about something that's going to be satisfying to me. Otherwise, you're just doing a task. I was thinking about that actually on my way here, about architects that I have dealt with, very successful ones, very well received in the industry. And I was thinking of the ones that I knew, that I met, they were never happy. And these guys had what the profession can give you. They were given awards. They were told that they were these great designers. They were not happy. I was fortunate because I worked for a man who was actually a fairly well-known architect, but he was happy because he was not caught up in the whole process of being recognized. So he was actually content. He actually brought him here a couple of times. He came here for some programs. But it's very important because we are all running around doing our things. Does it make us happy? I was thinking about that on my way here. I said, does it make it, do I go and get an award? Does that make me happy? In reality, it just makes you feel vindicated. It doesn't make you feel happy. Doesn't satisfy that internal feeling of contentment that you're looking for. Certainly architects are not content. That much I can tell you.
So I just wanted to make sure that we understand that we live in an age now where the soul is very often, tell me if you agree, buried, but it's in us and it has peace and it has love. And that's what we learn here. And that's the part of us that travels from lifetime to lifetime. But when we get to this point of the world disappointing us in many ways, we wake up a member of the world. But that's the persona, that's the ego, that's the limited happiness, getting the award. And then you wake up the next day and you have a heart attack or whatever. But it doesn't last. That happiness is constantly threatened. And we need to, and I love what you said, we need to bring eternity into, tell me if I'm understanding this right. We need to bring eternity into that present world. So when you said the moment we are living now is the only experience we have with eternity, you get that? Could you explain that just a little bit more deeply?
Well, in mathematics and in almost every philosophical context, when you talk about infinity, which is a mathematical construct for eternity, you talk about this line that goes on forever, right? However, in mathematics, that line is a point moving. That line is not a line. Line is only a construct that we make to define a point moving in a particular direction forever. Okay? That's infinity. It's not line that's infinite. It's that point moving that's infinite. That's in math. In every context that we talk about this, that infinity, that eternity is always a compendium of different moments, different conditions. And that's how eternity is created. Doesn't exist by itself. And we all of a sudden, are thrust into it. Right now, in terms of the universe of the world. We have this universe is so many billions of years old and it's so many billions of light years. Well, how do we know that? We know that because we have learned to take the point and project that point to the end of the universe. But it's the point that goes there. The infinity is the construct in our mind. The experience, science, and every kind of discipline, mathematics, is the point. It's how does that point travel? So in a line, the point travels indefinitely. Then if in mathematics, physics, which is one of my favorite subjects, point travels from here to here and it stops. And then all those points together travel in this dimension and you get a two-dimensional plane, right? And then you take those, all the points in the plane, traveling in another direction, you get a three-dimensional solid. But it's all points. Infinity and eternity exist as a construct of our perception of the moment. That's the point. That's why I say that. Always, it's always, always. The whole concept of eternity is ours. We created it. Doesn't exist anywhere. In case you guys thought that some came down from somewhere, it doesn't. We created the concept of eternity. And that eternity comes from our human consciousness, which is our spiritual consciousness, that basically says there is something transcendent. Otherwise, we wouldn't know. We created this. Eternity is our creation. All right?
So, in this physical world, Brother Tony is an architect, but look what he's bringing to us tonight. Physics, eternity, all of this wonderful stuff. I see it's getting late. If you have a question or a comment, that you would love that, right?
It's a physics test when you leave here, by the way.
No, a blessing when you leave here. No, you're free. All tests. Anybody want to comment or, yeah, sure. Or is Zoom able to chat if they choose?
Can you explain the concept of time?
Okay, time basically is, I'm stealing this from another great philosopher with Jamu Krishnamurti. Time is the distance between the past and the future. That's what time is. The moment between the past and the future. That's time. Now, we trace time, we measure it, we do all kinds of things, but the experience of time is the distance between the past and the future. That moment where the past is gone, we're not living in it, and the future, which is not there, and you're in this moment, that's time. That's the moment that we call time. And that's why that's the only connection we have with eternal time. And again, that perception is a spiritual perception. Every single scientist that has talked about these esoteric subjects, without exception, has made references to spiritual values. I mean, Einstein, all these people that define the universe as we know it were very clear. This is a perception that it's coming out of me, and that Einstein put it so elegantly. He says, I'm trying to figure out the mind of God. Okay? So these are constructs that we make. We think they exist outside of us. We think that eternity is like this mathematical concept No, we invented it. It didn't come out of anywhere. It doesn't exist on its own. We created it. We're all geniuses. We just tend to lose a little bit of it as we get older, but we create all of this stuff. We're the ones that create all these things that we think are so esoteric and so impossible to think. For a moment, when you're 2 years old, you invent a language. Everybody here has done that. Okay? Not one of you has not done that. And you invent a language. You're not just learning it from your parents, because kids that grow up in an environment when there's nobody else invent their language. Twins invent their own languages. Isolated kids invent their language. Deaf mute kids invent signing at 2 years of age. We invent a language at 2 years of age. We invent it. Where did that come from? I mean, that's like, you know what that is? Inventing a language? And we do that. So eternity is not a big deal.
Got it. Else? We have some time. Sarah, what do you think of your father on stage? They put you on the spot? Sitting there beaming.
I I loved the way that you talked about sort of presenting these things to the soul as gifts. I think it's a really beautiful reframing.
You have to hold the microphone close to you.
I love the idea of giving these things like to the soul as gifts. It's like a beautiful reframing of the idea of like the soul sustaining the body, but sort of like reframing it as like, what are the things that we honor our soul with to make it even more sort of like full? Because I think this idea of the soul not being greedy is really beautiful, that like give the soul recognition, it's happy. Give the soul, the next level of gift and it's happy again. And it just like keeps getting happier. And I don't know, it's like a very beautiful like reframing to think about it in that eternal moment. So really appreciated that frame.
Anyone else? So what was it like growing up with Tony? Let's put him on the spot.
I will say that there were definitely some dinner table conversations growing up that involved physics, eternity, perspective, and architecture. So.
Okay. Anyone else want to chat before we ask Tony to take us out? We have time. We have about 5 minutes. Okay. Hold on. Here comes Michelle. And while I'm walking over to Michelle, I have to remind all of you that next Thursday, we have our very special, same time, right? We have our holiday program, and Michelle and I are once again thespians. And Tony. So we're putting on a skit, so you have to come. Okay? And Anne also. Wow, we got everybody. Right. And maybe you next year. Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Tony. I don't know if I have a comment. Again, I'm kind of speechless because I'm churning, but it gives me thought that wasn't there before. And I think that's my body consciousness, is thinking that that arrogance that I understand everything. And it's like stick a pin in it. When I hear you, it's like it causes me, as Sarah said, to reframe. A reframing is going on. And there was something this morning too that got me, when your way of explaining was even better, that about the eternity is this moment. And that is very profound. And thank you for that, because I'm going to have to dive deeper into that, because that also has to be experienced, as opposed to sometimes I feel like a pundit just repeating it. And intellectually, yeah, maybe I grasp it a little bit, but that's an experiential thing that, thank you. That's a gift that you gave tonight. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a deep one. Any other comments about that? Anybody? Question or comment?
I have to start doing lectures where people can actually understand what I'm saying.
Well, if I'm waking up and I'm upset by something and I have a whole calendar in front of me and I'm making a laundry list in my head of all the things I have to do that day, but I stop and I go into my meditation room and I connect to that eternal source, Am I bringing eternity into the moment that wasn't there? Got it. That wasn't hard, right?
We just don't believe it, but it is. It's our experience. That's the eternal experience.
That's the eternal experience. That's why we want to study Raj Yoga and meditate. It's the only way to go. And the only thing you can trust is that, I'm going to call it energy, for lack of a better, is that okay with you?
Yeah, energy
Is that acceptable?
is what we
Um,
are.
Energy doesn't lie. That energy never lies. And we have it because we believe it and we own it. Isn't that beautiful? And we share it. Okay, so I just want to remind everybody that in addition to next Thursday, where you have to come, and that's December 15th. Oh, no, we have on the 15th on Sunday, 6:30 to 7:30, both in person and online, we have a meditation hour, world peace. There's a flyer on the back wall. So if you'd like to do that. And am I forgetting anything else? I don't think so. I think that's it for December. Of course, we will have a New Year's program and the holiday show also. Okay. All right. So hope to see you. And thanks for coming tonight. You too, Zoom. Okay. Brother Tony, would you take us out? We could stop a few minutes early if you want.
Okay.
Good?
All right. We stop our thoughts, our awareness, our consciousness for an instant. For a tiny point. And inhabit that infinitesimal point. Hence, all of these feelings, thoughts, emotions that surround this point are actually projections of this one focused point of energy and consciousness. They swirl around us, lighting up sky. But we recognize them as projections of this point. Reflections of this consciousness. We hold experiences, values, understanding, but they all come back to the point. Point that energizes all of these visions, all of these experiences, all of these actions. We can be clear that we always come back to that point. Energy and light and consciousness that's still and bright and clear. You know that's who we are.
Thank you so much for giving us the gift of in between the past and the future. You gave us an hour in eternity. This was beautiful. Thank you so much. And don't leave without your Toli and your blessing. And this Sister Anjani waiting to say hello if you'd like to say hi to her, the head of Harmony House. Shanti, everyone. See you next week. Did you want to say a few words? No.